Okay. So I'll move on to Professor Peterson. How are effective leaders striking the right balance between over and underconfidence? I mean, you're over, and then people say you're arrogant. You're under, and then maybe you're seen as weak. So, how does one strike a balance?
All right. If I could just add one other thing from what Dan was talking about, completely agree. And real collaboration with other people is not. I want to bring people in who are smarter than me. Everybody should want that, but that doesn't take account of people's skills and backgrounds. And so, what real collaboration is about is having a group of really smart people, each of whom contribute something different, genuinely working together. So, and I think when I've worked with colleagues and people who are smarter than me, I don't think I feel that if I know that if I'm bringing my own thing to the table, and it's not that hard in a leadership role. What is it that you're bringing in a leadership role that other people don't bring? And you need to be, as you say, confident enough that people respond to you, but not overconfident. And for me, this is about when I've studied CEOs for 35 years, and all the really good ones find a way to both have a point of view, be very confident in it, understand what they're doing in it, and be able to communicate it clearly. But at the same time, they're also really open when a better idea comes along. They find a way to stay in touch with what's going on at the bottom of their organization, at the coalface where value is being created, depending upon your business, wherever that is, whether it's with patients or on the manufacturing floor or whatever. You're the CEO, you can't possibly know everything that's happening every day, but you need to be in touch with that. That will essentially create a degree of, humility in there that says, look, I know where this organization needs to go, but I don't know everything about every detail of, about the product or what's happening right now. And it's being able to balance then those two. And that'll keep you from being, turning into the narcissist who believes they're the best at everything that they do and everything that they touch, because that's the killer one.
But Professor, you are exactly the example of a humble yet quietly confident professor that we all look up to. So how do you do that? How do you have this calm, confident, composed, and how can we learn from that? So some of us don't look like overconfident jazz hands creatures.
Yeah. Look, I think it's really about knowing that in a classroom or wherever I'm working with people that I've spent 30 years really focusing in on, in the grand scheme of the world, a very tiny thing. So you talk about that, right? And I probably know as much as anybody in the world, but get me slightly off of that and we don't. The best predictor, I always, young faculty, and they want to know about teaching at London Business School, the best advice I think I always give them is you have to respect the students. They bring to the table knowledge and history and background that you'll never have. You have something you need to teach them, but respect what they bring to the table, and you'll end up, forming the right kind of relationships, being able to communicate clearly what you're about, and not wandering off. It's that, and staying humble around things that they know that you may not know, whether it's culture or business or whatever. So for me, that's the clue. It's the staying in touch with the other stuff that leaders can easily disconnect from if they're not paying attention.
I like that. So MJ, before the show, we were talking about humility versus faking it till you make it. And I know Professor Cable has stuff on humility. So we go there and then go to fake it till you make it?
Sure.
Great.
Professor Cable?
I'm going to not say too much right now because I feel like I've said a lot. But about humility, it appears like it's most important now when it comes to leaders, because as the world changes faster and faster, the leader can't have all the solutions. And I think that's a really, really important thing to remember. It's the people that are going to solve the problems are often, and have the new ideas, are often, if not at the coalface, several steps down. So, and I think the idea, or at least in my own world, in the 80s and the 90s, I think there was this master of the universe approach where you really were supposed to at least act dominant, like you knew it all. And I think that that's been demonstrated to shut people down and not allow people to play to their strengths and not bring out their unique ideas and to not try new things and experiment. And so that the only thing I'm happy to say so much about this, Stephanie, but I feel as though Kathleen can really do a lot around the practice, sort of fake it till you make it and practice and so on. And I'm happy to talk about that too. But the word that I want to put out there right now is I still believe that in many organizations, culturally, humility is seen as weak.
Exactly.
Almost servile. Like instead of being a servant leader, I think a lot of people see servitude, and we're not saying that. You can have a lot. In fact, you have to have a lot of confidence to be a servant. You have to have a lot of confidence in order to be humble. But I'm not sure that lots of organizations have put that together yet culturally. So anyway, come back to me if you want, but let's hear what Kathleen has to say about that.
I might defer to Nero because I haven't heard from Nero. So I'm happy to defer to Nero if Nero wants to be deferred to. Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's fine. So a couple of quick thoughts with regards to, I guess, broadly humility, but really sort of controlling confidence. I think Randall alluded to this, just almost sort of having the mindset in lots of scenarios that you're there to kind of learn, not to sort of teach or tell people what to do. So this is, again, apologies for going back into negotiations. But one of the things I repeatedly tell sort of all my students is if there's one mindset that you could take before stepping in, it should be the mindset of you're there to learn. So in that first meeting or that first conversation, because many of them will come up with these great planning documents. I have the solution, I could come up with the perfect deal. And that's the wrong attitude. And partly I tell them, don't. Just you're there for one reason only, is to learn about your counterpart. And it's done for two reasons. One, it helps you sort of structurally in negotiation, but the other is it allows you to temper the confidence. So you're not going in there wanting to be the one solving the thing, right? So Dan sort of said, you're supposed to be the one that solves everything. And I think sort of even adopting that kind of growth mindset, or that the very fact that you could always learn from everyone. I've learned from every class that I've taught at LBS. The students I'm better for it, but I think it requires you to sort of have that mindset. And one of the benefits, and there's some research that shows this, is that adapting that mindset helps temper that confidence. The slight bit, and Dan mentioned this about sort of not aspiring, if you're sort of 60 and aspiring to sort of 108, is that we're really bad at it, right? We have aspirations, but some of those aspirations go out of control. There's an entire area of research around this idea of a big fish, small pond effect, or whether you want to be a small fish in a big pond. And this is acutely aware now. So I have a son who's about to do the 11 plus and choose schools. And invariably in sort of conversations with parents, you could sort of see, well, this is the school I want them to go to. And it's perhaps not a very good choice, because they'll run into this issue that Dan sort of eloquently pointed out, is that it's not good if you're at X and everyone else is 3X. But it's a hard choice, and there's an entire literature. Much of that is around sort of choosing the right pond to play in. That has huge implications, both for your confidence, lack of confidence. Kathleen talked about self-efficacy, and again, you could get into these negative spirals by making that wrong choice. You can see my bias. I tend to be a judgment decision-making guy. So all of what Dan and everyone said is accurate. I believe in it, yet we fail. This is why sort of many of us study why smart people do dumb things. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, then I'll go back to Kathleen. In your webinar on leading people through a crisis, you said that speed is of paramount importance for leaders in times of crisis. Now, how can one be confident when they are making decisions with incomplete information and without taking the time that they normally do?
Yeah, I get the question. I get the question. You're never going to have all the information. It's just a function of life. You're never going to have all the information. I think sometimes we wait, right? We just delay and we delay and delay until we know more. And I think that what we've seen, just in terms of leaders, is that the leaders that we seem to be gravitating to now, or at least paying attention to and saying, wow, that was really impressive, are leaders that took decisive action without having the full information, right? I mean, I think, and I mentioned this during the webinar, Jacinda Ardern very early on, she was decisive. I'm sure she didn't have all the information. She couldn't have had all the information, but she had enough to say, I think this is the right answer. When it comes to a crisis, and I will go back to that was in March that we gave that, it's still the advice that I'm trying to give leaders that I'm talking to, which is, and this is to Dan's point, when I say take decisive action, it doesn't have to be telling other people what to do. It might be turning it over and bringing those voices up into the room. Dan does a great exercise in his classes I've seen him do. It's called Tanagram. I could leave it to Dan to talk about it, and I'll steal your thunder maybe just for a moment, Dan. But it's a great exercise, because what it does is you have a group of people who go in and they're the managers and they have to figure something out, and they don't know what they're doing, just abbreviated. And then you've got a whole rest of the group that's outside saying, let us help you. And it's the leaders are trying hard to get the right answer before they bring the others in. And so, am I still on? I think so. So I'm messing it up, Dan. But the idea here is that leaders are trying to get it right before they bring in the subordinates to say, help, and let's try to help execute. And I think that is the problem. Is that they're trying to get it right. And so they're slowing down. They're trying to get all the information when you have to be more nimble. And you probably should be pulling the better ideas up from below the organization. I'm seeing this in lots of organizations. By the way, just so you know, Dan and Randall and Nero and we all do belong to an organization, right? I mean, we're teammates and we're colleagues and we belong to an organization. And we put out calls in our own organization. You know, we're here in some circles, and sometimes we're down here in others. I'm saying you have to be willing to bring the voices in pretty early. This exercise.
Okay. Professor Peterson, what can a naturally confident, assertive individual do in order to tone down a little and thereby not come across as arrogant or overly confident?
Yeah, Dan, you had your hand up. Is there something you wanted to add to Kathleen before I answer?
Just real briefly, as Kathleen was talking there, it just dawned on me that another way to think about confidence is confidence in the people on your team. And I don't think we can get much farther down that path, but it almost felt to me like one of the core issues is not the confidence that I dominate and that I know the right answer, but that I have created a team that knows how to respond, and giving that, I don't know if you want to call that empowerment, or I don't know if you want to call that, decision-making power, but that's a different type of confidence that today really helps, because it helps you move fast. If you don't have confidence in your team, it might go fast and bad. But so it's interesting to think about what we would have to do in organizations to ensure that leaders had the confidence in their teams. That's all I wanted to say, though, because it feels like a different type of confidence.
And it nicely answers the question that I was asked, I think. What is it that allows leaders to stay in touch? And that is to be if they genuinely believe that other people have something to contribute to the conversation, that makes you, by definition, kind of open to that possibility, and it means it's more likely that you will do that. If I look at what do CEOs do here, sometimes they make the ceremonial visit to a site kind of thing. That's typically ceremony. But if, I think some of I've done a lot of time, spent a lot of time in the Gulf region studying leaders there. And that tradition of consultation, if done well, is exactly the point, what it should be. Consulting people, really making sure that you're understanding what's happening at the bottom level in the organization is a great tradition to have if you do it well. But there are other things you can do, right? Data, how much time does a CEO spend with the employee engagement survey that every organization does? Surprisingly, very little. It's handed off to the HR person to do some stuff with it. But does the senior leader actually engage that survey? If they did, they'd probably find some really interesting stuff in there. Maybe some cynicism about what they're saying or about the strategy. And if they really understood that and tried to then think about what they could do about that, you're much more likely to see them approach the problem in a way that would be more functional. So loads of, if you're inclined to want to approach from a learning perspective, everything that Neera was talking about is absolutely the way. And there's some really amazing data coming out in the last few years showing, for example, even at organization level, organizations that focus on learning and performance outperform organizations where the culture is performance focused alone, right? Learning allows you to get your head up and out, and not just you, but everybody in the organization that can perhaps warn you that there's something headed out of the sky towards your organization and you need to pay attention to it. So it's that, if you're even at that very senior level, humble enough to say, I need to learn, it'll work. You'll find your way.
Okay, good. Professor Nero, so is fake it till you make it the way to go?
Is it the way to go? It certainly works. There's now ample evidence that it certainly works, right? Kathleen briefly mentioned this. Part of the struggle isn't that you fake it till you make it, but sort of taking that first step, because oftentimes the greatest friction is the ones you set for yourself, which is you think you're not quite ready for this role, or you're not ready to speak up, you're not ready to take on that responsibility, and part of that, not to sound like a broken record, is partly kind of your own sense of whether do you sort of learn, or are you just sort of, is your capacity to do something fixed, that you either have it or you don't. And again, there's now very clear evidence that mindset shift makes a difference. So oftentimes the question isn't whether if you fake it, will you make it? It's, are you willing to go down that route? And the research on that is very clear that if you take that small step, it again puts in motion sort of these positive cycles, because you don't function in a vacuum, right? That you're in a social system that provides you feedback, both positive as well as negative. But doing that first bit, and sort of Dan talked about, instilling confidence in others, right? So I do a lot of stuff around kind of status and leadership, and there's multiple routes to attain leadership. Oftentimes people think that you need to go down the dominance route, but there's also something called the prestige route, which is around sort of passing on of knowledge, is helping others get better in whatever task or whatever element that is that benefits the group, the organization, et cetera. And sort of doing those things, which is another way to sort of conceptualize it, is instilling strength in others or helping boost the confidence of others, also yields a path or a route to leadership. So, I mean, Randall's done a lot of work with CEOs. There are ones that will attain their power and confidence and status through dominance. And it works. It's not my style, but it certainly works. But there's also another style that is equally viable that allows you to get ahead. And so part of it is sort of deciding what works for you. But even if you're in a culture or a group where you need to sort of expand or sort of flex your muscle, a lot of it is just that friction in sort of taking that first step. And you'll find that has knock-on positive externalities, which sort of feed back to you making it, so to speak.
Professor Nero, that was amazing. And now we're going to go to the Q&A to the audience. Some great questions here.
I think Randall has some additions.
I just have to say, dominance works for keeping the rule. It does not work for getting stuff done. There's really good research showing that the other methods, the prestige route, other things are better if you want to be remembered in the future for doing anything that mattered.
Have you found this yourself?
Have I found it myself? Yes.
Yeah. In the workplace, that someone's been dominant and it hasn't worked out.
Yeah. So dominance is a great way of getting that job and holding on to it. But the point is, you become increasingly desperate for holding on to it, and you start to do increasingly desperate things. And if you want a great historical example, just read up about Robert Mugabe. He's like epitomizes that idea.
I mean, desperate is never a good look. But is dominance really insecurity?
But it does allow you to stay on top. Officially of a crumbling system, of a crumbling organization, no doubt, but you're still on top, right? Because it's about being on top, not about doing anything that matters.
Randall, I feel like you're referring to some state or some global leader, but I will leave it at that.
I'm saying nothing.
Okay, can I go to Janita Hurley with her question on imposter syndrome? That's going to go to Dan. And then after that, MJ, we've got Hannah, and she's going to be asking you about how feeling judged, the fear of being judged, and how that can affect your confidence. So Janita, are you with us? Maybe she's dropped off the call.
Yes, thank you, Steph. Thanks for hosting. It's it's a great session. I was just wondering if you could sort of like give more advice on the imposter syndrome, in the sense that if somebody initially might have had that confidence and then they get put into an environment that is completely outside of their usual experience, and then they have this imposter syndrome feeling. How do you stop that from spiraling out of control and maybe regain the confidence that you might have once previously had?
Yeah, thanks, Janita. I think that's, wow. It's a great question. It's probably something we've all experienced in some way, shape, or form. You end up in a scenario where one way to think of it is, you feel as though the people around you are expecting more out of you than you feel that you can give. It's almost like there's a research literature called self-verification, where we would like it if the people around us kind of understood what our competencies were, because they wouldn't over-demand and we wouldn't fail. So I do really understand what you're saying. I'm going to put out one idea. There may be some others that it sparks, but one would be, when we're using phrases like fake it till you make it, there's a couple of assumptions built into that might be a little bit scary. It kind of sounds like a high wire without a net. And if I fake it well, then I make it to the other side, and I don't think it has to be that way. For example, I think that we can create safer sandboxes in which to practice instead of even thinking about the word fake it. Like, I don't know, I'm going to go through a couple just to get my thoughts out there. But say it was something to do with being, in my case, a professor, or that's what Kathleen mentioned earlier. And the first time you have to stand in front of, 70 people, 80 people, some of whom are older than you and much more experienced than you, and try to tell them something, faking it might not come off well. But if you practice in a small setting, maybe like first with 5 other professors, you try that, it's safer. Then you move into something where maybe there's 15 people in the room, but they're kind of friends, and you kind of work your way up to it. That would be a way to practice without having to necessarily fake it. The thing that I'm really responding to, Janita, is this idea you said about negative spirals. If you go into a high pressure situation where you can fail, and you fake it badly, what you kind of teach yourself is, I'm not good at this.
Yeah.
And that's really threatening. And then I can really imagine you having even half the self-confidence next time, and then you fake it harder, and that feels desperate to me. As Stephanie said, that's not a good look. So the first idea I want to put out there is the one where you start smaller and you try to manufacture these lower risk settings. And maybe you think of that as part of the real job. In my own life, I think that a lot of times I get into this habit of like not wanting to do more work than I have to do. But sometimes you can flip that and say, what is the work that I want to do in order to get good at this? Even if like it's on the side, or it's extra work, or it's at night, it's what's going to allow me to get to that confidence. So that's all I can say for now, but I really empathize with the sense of the question. And I really think that most people on the call have felt it at some point.
Thank you.
And Janita, if I could just add one more element to it, which is sometimes just fake it till you make it sometimes gets conflated with sort of being inauthentic, right? So somehow you're doing something that isn't yourself. And I think, and that's certainly not the case, right? So I think it's also about sort of playing to your strengths. Sort of Dan talked about this, and sort of an example of this is oftentimes when juniors come into our group, as with every other group, they'll go and watch star teachers, right? Dan's, Randall's, Kathleen's, etc. And they're like, oh, let me try and do that. And one of my first advice is do not try to mimic Dan or Randall, because they have their own style, and that comes across as incredibly inauthentic. I've been in a classroom where someone tried to do that, and it's just students see it a mile away, right? It looks awkward, it looks out of sync. But with each person, it's about sort of learning something that is aligned with sort of yourself, that allows you to be authentic. And I think everyone I've watched, again, going back to this learning mindset, there's bits and pieces that you could pick up that helps you kind of be yourself, but with better, if you will, until you have the confidence.
I was wondering. I mean, can the skills or lessons that were taught in business school be used and applied at home? For instance, if you have a son or a wife who lacks confidence, can I experiment on my spouse, or someone at home? Would that be helpful as well?
Go ahead and ask the faculty. I look around and I'm like, I think they all do this. I think we all do this. Ask Nero how he's raising his kids, or Dan, or Randall. I mean, yeah, no, I think that's right. Yeah. So, so this goes to, I think, Hannah's point, which is, I like the idea that we're all entitled as human beings to have a certain amount of dignity and value and confidence in our worth. And I think, but not everybody has been, I think, given that gift in the families in which they've been raised. And so, and I think we have to acknowledge some of that. I mean, we don't have to get into all of our stories. Everybody here has a story of someone who had a lot of faith in them and in whose eyes they really shone. And then they have other people who were much more dismissive and not recognizing kind of what was special about them. So I think that leads to my point always, which is, what kind of leader are we going to be to the people around us, which is one who nurtures and tries to instill that confidence. And this isn't fake praise. This is about understanding where the stretch might be, seeing where the strengths are, and making some appropriate decisions about what people do. I'm a pretty confident person, I suppose. I went through graduate school. I had a terrible advisor. This goes, I think, to Janita's point, with whom, one day, 2 years into my program, my roommate woke up and said to me, you came into this program super confident and really smart, and you are not that person anymore. And I changed advisors. Like, that was the day I went to somebody else and said, I got to get away from this guy. Like, this is not a healthy situation. And so, I broke up with that advisor, or I quit that job, or you have to separate from people in your life who aren't helpful in terms of you trying to maintain that confidence. So, I think it's a great gift to have it. And I think it can be shaken. And I think those are moments sometimes we have to sort of grab ourselves, do some of the affirmations that Dan talked about, or just move to a situation where, that becomes a memory and not something we're actively working on. But yeah, we use it at home. You should meet my kids. They are models of psychological guinea pigs. I mean, I raised them. I know exactly what the literature says about anxiety and confidence. I know it, and I use it all the time.
Okay.
But they're not on the call today, so they can't argue with anything.
I know them, and they're great kids.
Do we have any other question from Stephanie? I was going to ask another question.
We have John Boyle, and I'd like to pose this for Nero. So John Boyle, would you like to ask her question?
Yeah, I actually asked two questions. So was it the first one or the second one?
I'll answer the easier one.
Okay. The easier one, or the easier one probably is, does the optimal level of confidence you should show vary depending upon the situation? If so, how?
That was the easier one, John?
If so, how? I just added in spontaneously to make it a little bit more difficult for you.
Yeah, so I think this is sort of so I'll tell you sort of the literature, and then I'll come to the practice. literature, this is the $1 million question between how do you strike the balance between optimism, and which is incredibly important for your psychological safety, your psychological functioning. Right? So there's lots of research of sort of who's more confident. Is it sort of depressed people or those who aren't? And sort of some of the work suggests that many of those forms of confidence that I mentioned, they're sort of better, they have a better sense of realism than some of us. They still show overconfidence, but they're certainly not as optimistic. So finding the right balance between the right amount of confidence, at least from the research front, I don't know, my colleagues have come across anything. I have yet to see something that very clearly sort of states this is how you go about sort of establishing the right level of confidence. I think in practice, John, I think it's a lot of the bits that I think all of us said in various forms of everything from sort of trying out different things, sort of taking a mindset of wanting to learn, growth mindset, etc. I don't know if I have a very good answer for how you do a gut check to ensure that you're not overconfident in that scenario. And part of the reason is we also tend to, we're reinforced in the domains that we get praise in. So we invariably venture off to those domains, which of course further feed our confidence, right? Which is why we're scared to try out new things. I'm certainly guilty of it, right? Which is, one of the topics I like teaching is negotiations, and then you sort of stay there because you keep getting sort of positive feedback, and then you become, you're like, oh, should I try a new course? I've since done it, but for a lot of times it's like, oh, that's kind of hard, and I don't know if I want to do that, and you sort of stay within that domain. So one sort of easy litmus test is if you're in one specific area and you've been there for a while, you're far more likely to make errors of overconfidence. And this is now shown in sort of military training. You could think through lots of context if you're sort of if you've just repeatedly gotten reinforcement, and oftentimes positive reinforcement, a lot of the overconfidence that you see historically, whether it be sort of M&A ventures, CEO overconfidence and CEO hubris tends to be very high, empire building, all of that stuff tends to be in domains where they've repeatedly gotten positive feedback. So I guess that's about kind of the closest thing I could give you to with regards to a kind of a litmus test to assess if you're overconfident. But maybe I'll tap in here with one of my tag team partners if they want to jump in.
I was going to ask Professor Cable I think because you promised you to leave at 15 past. I don't know if that still stands. So I'll let you say maybe some final words before you leave.
Okay,
and then we can continue with the rest. Thank you. Thank you, sir.
I think that this question of how do you know if it's enough is when we get back to finding out how other people are perceiving you and receiving you. Whoever mentioned, I think that was you, MJ, but it's this idea that you may not be the best judge of how you're coming off socially. And so honestly, one of the best ways to do it is less formal and more finding somebody that you trust and that trusts you, and you can get real-time feedback that you can believe in. I think that's essential. I think it really is. So that's one thought, that you might not be able to do that yourself. That's something. I think a second thing I'd put out there is, I think Kathleen mentioned, there's a phrase that says that we don't want to be praised, we want to be praiseworthy. And it's this idea that if you're moving up an organization and getting more and more power, you're also going to get more and more sycophants who make it their job to protect you from how you need to improve. They basically make it their job to protect you from irritating information. And it's a really risky space to be in. It's called the CEO disease, because you essentially are stopped from learning in some weird way because nobody around you will challenge you. And as you move up, you have to work harder and harder against that. I think there's something really valuable for all of us, frankly. It touches on what Nero said around staying in your comfort zone and allowing that buffer to sort of be, it may feel good, but it may lead to an extremely biased overconfidence and even a narcissism that turns a lot of people off, and it limits you, but it feels kind of good. So that's the last thing that I wanted to say. And I wanted to thank everybody for, getting me involved. I do have to jump off to my next meeting now, but thank you. Thank you for letting me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
I want to tell you that as your career grows, you can rely on all of us to give you grounding feedback.
I know.
Because it's lonely at the top. I get it. So I was there. No. So, but thank you so much for coming on. Everyone, dancable.com. Amazing books, amazing insights there. Thank you for coming on. And we'll
thank you so much, everyone.
Big round of applause for Dan Cable. Great.
Just one comment, Stephanie, that I wanted to bring up, and that's one thing I learned from Kathleen's class, or an experiment that I did, is coffee with a cup of coffee with the CEO. Maybe I should change it to a cup of tea. But anyhow, so what I did is I went out and I looked for the youngest people in the department, and you'll be surprised how much feedback and secrets they can uncover once you've had a coffee and sat down with them for 10 minutes. So that's a useful exercise to do. Sorry for that.
No problem. I'd like to take Ihab Tabara, and I'd like to go to Nero. And Ihab was saying when you first came into the program that you felt that sort of uncomfortableness, the unconfidence thing, and then it built up over there. And I think it's a real lesson how does a professor make sure that everyone feels comfortable and confident, and how, when we go into an organization as leaders, how can we instill that in a new environment? So I've had the pleasure of Professor Kathleen when she has this phrase, well, the water is warm, it's safe, you can speak, and makes everyone feel comfortable. So Professor Nero, you've got your own techniques, I'm sure. And Ihab, do you want to start by telling us how you felt when you first came into the MBA program, how confident you felt, and how it improved, maybe?
Thank you so much, Steph. Actually, when I started the program, I was a bit anxious, I've been away from studying since a long time. And it took me some time to, go back in the game. So, and I took on the role also of being academic rep, so which built up my confidence more and being out there. So basically, I just throw myself out there and try new things, and it works out fantastically. So over time, I start to build in my confidence just over the year of the program.
Professor Nero, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so Kathleen's earlier comment about sort of her advisors certainly resonated in sort of the opposite direction. So I had a fabulous PhD advisor who unfortunately very recently passed away. And one of the things that I took lots of things away, but his view, he said he had two groups of children, his academic children and sort of his biological ones. But his primary goal as an advisor was, he said, I'm just simply here to protect your confidence. The field, and Kathleen and Randall can echo this, not necessarily in the classroom, but the other part of what we do on the research front, you get a ton of no's, and for sort of every one paper that you got accepted, there's been about 100 people along the way at every stage that have said, everything from this sucks to far more colorful comments that I will spare you from at this moment. So it's a great hit on your confidence. There's lots of students who sort of question, sort of like Ihab did before coming in, like, is this even for me? People drop out. There are even sort of faculty that sort of go through that, right? And he said his number one goal, or his primary goal, was just to protect my confidence. That's what he did in almost anything that he did. And that's, I've learned lots from him, but that's one that I now do with my students, is that I'm just simply there. And that could be, they might pursue a research question instead of me just sort of right off saying this is awful. And it might be not because the idea wasn't there, but given the prior literature and various other things, I sort of walk them through that exercise sort of to find out from their perspective why they like it, and those are sort of small steps, but even just sort of imagining that every conversation that you have, and I think I also sort of adapt that in, Ihab was in my negotiation and bargaining class. There might have been questions or comments that some people might have made that he or others might have thought was, that we could have skipped. But even in those, there is, if you follow the lineage of that question, it comes from a place that's worth understanding. And part of doing that is partly for sort of better myself, but it's also to kind of protect their confidence, so they feel they're not shut down and they no longer speak for the remaining 27 hours in that classroom. So, and again, so I'm a big believer in sort of kind of the mindset that you start with, which then has knock-on effects in the way you sort of carry yourself with others.